Hello, welcome. It's another Friday. It's another month. It's half moon. It's very close to Ramadan, 3 weeks precisely, exactly. No, sorry, I can't say precisely exactly because that would be scientific. It's not based on science, it's based on sighting because they're going to send a couple of oaks down on the border and they need to sit up in their minarets. And then, as soon as they see the moon, then they need to use modern equipment to call it in and say, now we can officially start Ramadan. This is going to be a sad Ramadan. Welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show, where we discuss Islam. Welcome, Rob. Welcome, Speakers Corner UK. How's it going your side?
Good evening, sir. Yeah, been hectic, but we're here now. Phew, long day, trying to get stuff done and from home and so forth. And wishing everybody a good evening, and hopefully you're all in good health.
So, welcome everybody in the chat. Welcome Oh, there's not so many people there today. I don't know why. Is it the battle fatigue after battling coronavirus so much? Oh goodness, I don't know. Okay, so it's the month of April. We're just a few days away from Ramadan, which is going to be incredibly stressful for a lot of Muslims, I believe. And what we've done is we've started a new theme this month, which Jesus, I don't know what to do with this because there's so much. There is so much, and we've only got 4 episodes. I see next month we have five in May, 5 Fridays. This month there's only four. And this thing with slavery, I mean, there's so much to get through. There is so much material, and this is at the moment on high alert because there's a lot of Muslims at the moment who are obviously embarrassed by the topic and are trying to somehow whitewash, cleanse, soften, or whatever the thing. And all they're doing is just sort of, excuse me, I don't know. They're fidgeting. Of no, what do you call it? If you falsify, if you what happens if you falsify a signature? You fake. No, there's a name
Yeah,
for
it's
it.
fraud, right?
Yeah, but there's a special
In,
name for it. Okay,
oh,
it doesn't matter. But all they're
hmm,
doing is they're trying to change some words around. So they're trying to fake the meaning or the contents of words in the Quran so that they are not slaves. And they think that if they label it something different, they've made it. But they've not, because they have not changed the entire contents. They have not changed anything around the. No, it's not fabricate. Shit, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. They've not changed everything that's behind it, because just changing a label does not mean you're changing the contents. So if you say, well, it's not a slave, yeah, but at the end of the day, if it's an employee, are you allowed to screw your employee just at random and whenever you want to? You can't. So why would you go and it's somehow leave something in your will to an employee? So there's a lot of things that are wrong with this. Anyway, with the Gin and Tonic Show, we help Muslims and non-Muslims alike to understand what Islam is. We do a live broadcast every Friday. This is what we're doing right now, here and now. And this is what is going live to YouTube and to Facebook. And anybody can watch live, can comment, question, query, correct, or whatever on Facebook and on YouTube, and then later just watch it as an archive. The live show is being recorded. All your comments, everything that you are writing, everything is being recorded, so we can go back and refer to things later on if there is anything that we have missed. So we critique Islam because we know a little bit more about Islam, at least I do, than most other ideologies. And I use or try to use facts, reality, and reasoning without attacking any personal Muslim or no, attacking a Muslim personally. That's what I wanted to say. And I condemn any kind of abuse, oppression, misogyny, slavery, violence, anything like that. So I condemn slavery, and I'm going to say it here and now. I condemn the transatlantic slave trade the same way as I condemn the sub-Saharan slave trade. Okay, just to be 100% clear on this. Now, we try and be decent human beings. Um, this is just what we're trying to do. So it's not that we wrote the Quran. We didn't write the Hadith either. We're just quoting. So we let the Quran speak for itself. But I cannot help what is in the Quran. Now, the people, I'm now under fire and I'm being banned left, right, and center for something that I said because I created a meme where I said, well, companies are running special shifts just to produce more alcohol so that we can disinfect things, surfaces, fighting the coronavirus. And then I wrote underneath, Islam is prohibiting all forms of alcohol. And people don't like this. Excuse me. And now people are angry with me that I'm saying something about Islam. And there's an idiot on the free speech, the Speaker's Corner free speech. I don't know if this is not even Boma in disguise, because he's also like lying about all sorts of things and bringing up like really stupid willy-nilly, anything. And the thing is that he says, yeah, but Muslims are using alcohol. This is not my point. Yes, a lot of Muslims are using alcohol. Like a lot of Muslims are condemning slavery. But the Quran does not. The Quran does not say don't use alcohol except if you want to fight the coronavirus to wipe down surfaces. It doesn't say that. In Islam, alcohol is banned. And if you look in the Sunnah, you will see that the manufacturing, the transportation, the handling, the selling, anything related to alcohol is prohibited. And this is what we need to appreciate. And this is something that is there. We can't make it undone. It simply is part of Islam. So we can't just go and pretend like just because some scholar says, no, it's okay to use alcohol, that this is now all over Islam. And this is what we are differentiating. We're differentiating what the texts are saying from what the personal, whatever interpretation is of individual Muslims. All right. We're going to go anyway through the normal routine. I'm just a little bit scared of the slavery part. And we see, Thunder has also made it. There's no football, so he must have been playing ping pong with his nephew again or something like this. Welcome, Thunder. Imam. Today you are Imam, Thunder. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Hello to my fellow co-panelists, Robs and Stocks. Good to be with you guys this weekend under strange conditions, I'm sure strange for all the audience too. But just before we go any further, I'd like to apologise for my comment last week where I was being facetious. Got no excuse. So to all the Muslims out there, a sincere apology for my joke that, to be honest, on reflection, it wasn't amusing. And to my co-panelists, I apologise to you guys too.
Oh, it must have gone right over my head.
Yeah, I don't remember it specifically either. Good evening, Thunderous.
I won't say it again then. I won't say it again.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll be facetious and apologise to everybody.
But now, what is this change of a vocation?
It's not a relapse. No, every week I try to come up with something original. Nobody's put anything in the comments about any suggestions as to what my identity should be this week. So I just figured, well, just come as no Muslims are joining the panel, so I figured I'd come as the devil's advocate.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, good.
Cool stuff. Now, the first thing I need to do, I know it's embarrassing, but Thinking Clearly has been at it again. This time he's taken Dandy Warhol's lyrics about Muhammad, and he says this captures Muhammad as a man wrestling with visions of hell and conscience. And he's added a spoiler. I don't know if I'm supposed to read this before. Mo loses. Okay. Now, Thinking Clearly, this one is your mistake, your fault. I do not take any responsibility for it. This is you, okay? So if anybody doesn't like it, it's not me. Thinking Clearly came up with this. Again and again, I get up and say, I only want to get it right. I only want to do the right thing. But are these demons? I ask myself. I wonder today. I'm alone, but then no one can make their own life. No one can say that they're an island when all this freedom that you get is a lie. Okay, that's it. Thinking clearly. Thank you very much. Can you explain what the fuck this was? And he says maybe we could have a segment on Muhammad in popular culture. It's actually a good idea. Muhammad in popular culture. What would Muhammad do today? What would he look like today? What would he represent today?
Presumably he'd be locked up or in a mental asylum.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, let me give you a little bit of news. The number one thing is
Oh, he's jumped off. There, he's back on again.
oh, okay. Because on
That was you, Stops,
April,
that jumped off.
in April, on the 11th of April, we're going to have London's first Muslim Pride. Can you believe it? So I'm looking forward to that. So I wonder what the reaction is going to be. That's going to be fascinating, I think. Then what we have is the Indonesian women. And now this is very mixed, and I'm not sure. I'm just giving you this, all right? Indonesian women are welcoming the hijab or the niqab or whatever as a protection, and then B, but also that conservative, this Islamic dress is number one, a troubling step towards extremism, and B, the marginalization of women. So Indonesian women are a little bit split on this, because on the one hand they welcome it because not everybody can ogle them, which I think is not true, because it makes you stick out. Whereas a girl, if she has short hair, jeans, and a t-shirt, sometimes you can't tell if she's a girl or boy or whatever. But if you're wearing this niqab thing, you stick out. And a lot of women are complaining that they are being singled out as victims of groping and things like that. But they are also very much aware that it is extremism, and that B, it does marginalize women. It makes them different from everybody else because they are the ones who have to wear something different than everybody else, than the rest of the world, and men in general also. Okay, then I've got 3 items on Qur'ana. For people of many faiths, it can feel lately like the end of the world. Because, I mean, I don't know if you know, I think everybody is aware of the eschatology, that there is going to be an end time, and there's going to be judgment, and then it's going to be decided whether you go to heaven or hell and things like that. In Pakistan, we really have crazy people, because it says it isn't possible to close mosques under any circumstances in an Islamic country. Now, what I can't understand this. They are seeing that Muslims, Christians, Taoists, Hindus, Sikhs, anybody is getting sick. So the gods are failing. Or maybe all the gods are doing this on purpose. Who knows? But we can see that praying to a specific god does not have any kind of an effect. So I don't know why they think that Muslims are different when Muslims are dying left, right, and center. I don't understand that. As soon as you have a kind of a group mentality where people are congregating, that this is exactly the area where people are dying the quickest and dying the most. So I don't know why they think that they are special in any way. And then lastly, coronavirus is produced in United States labs as a part of biological war against the Islamic nations. I didn't know that Italy is an Islamic nation. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
if that's the
this
case,
is being
they're
repeated
targeting.
again and again.
Yeah, their targeting is pretty weak because it's killing all their allies, or it's infecting all their allies, right?
And
But
which
don't let
country
everything
has
like
the
logic.
most? Which country has the most affected people at the moment? The US. because they have a, I mean, the role of the president in the US is a little bit different than in other countries. Okay, in other countries it's more representative, but in the US this is like the number one US American citizen. And they have a total fool as a president at the moment. And maybe this is what they need. Maybe this is what they want. But this idiot is telling people, "Ah, don't worry, it's just one Chinaman, and it's 15 cases, and they will disappear like magic in April." And now it's 1 million. So he's saying, well, maybe we can open Easter. Well, maybe not. Maybe now it's end of Easter. He still does not understand the damage that he is doing. He still says we are doing a tremendous job. No, you fool, you are not. You are the reason, and you personally are the reason why we have so many dead people and so many affected people in the US. Because this Trump idiot was the guy who said in the beginning, "Ah, don't worry, it's not so bad." If he had reacted the right way, like Cuomo and de Blasio and all these other guys, if he would have reacted that way, he could have saved lives, and he didn't. It's amazing. It's amazing what
And yeah,
a guy
Potholer,
can do.
Potholer did a video on it. So if you go and look at Potholer's channel, he breaks it down over the period when it first happened, etc. But I guess back to Islam, I suppose, why, if this is supposed to be some sort of assault against Islam, then it's failing spectacularly. Or at least it's infecting all of its own allies as well. So, yeah. Just another crazy claim.
And what is quite funny, because when I was looking for the hadith of the week today, I was trying to find something related to this, and I was not even aware that in Bukhari, book 71 is actually called medicine. So there's a whole collection of medical area sort of oriented hadiths there, like the one that I think we had last time. There's no disease that Allah has created except that He's also created a treatment. Now, it's quite amazing what you find there. I think it's hilarious if you read them, except it is incredibly sad if you really look at this, if you really look at what these people are saying, what they're thinking, and they actually believe this. And this for me is wow. Oh boy. Any comments on this?
Yeah, I think
No.
I think what we've said already, really, with people making crazy claims.
Okay, anything? I'm just checking the comments. There's nothing on the. I wrote a poem about Islamic slavery in the comments on the video. I thought this is what I was just reading. Oh, okay, on the trailer. Yes, I must have missed that one. Okay, can I quickly open this? Or Rob, can you do this quickly?
What's that?
Open the trailer, because apparently there's a poem there which clearly made on the trailer for the Gin and Tonic show. Or maybe I can quickly go there to
I
Gin
can't
and
see it
Tonic
at the
show.
moment.
Gin and yes, this is the stupid search
Well, let's do it a
function.
bit later on, shall we? Otherwise, we hold everything up.
I've got it.
Okay.
Slavery and Islam, and there I have. Let's just take a look at the comments. Makes my lockdown all the better. Thank you. Juicy stops another. Here we go. All right, here there's another poem. Oh boy. Clearly, what are you doing to me? Slavery on the Gin and Tonic show. Islamic ethics will suffer a blow. Bacon and alcohol banned in one stroke. But owning a person? No need to revoke. The Prophet owned them, bought them and sold them. Enjoy them for sex, to his men he told them. So listen this month to the knowledge imparted. Islamic slavery, not for the faint-hearted. That's
Very
better.
nice.
That's a lot
Very
better.
nice.
That's a lot better than the previous one. Hey, that one's quite clear. How do you
Yeah,
do this? Sorry, Imam, did you say something?
No, I was just saying I appreciate the fact that he takes the time to like mention
Yes,
for the
I think
themes that we
it's
have every month. Yeah, it's appreciated.
wonderful. All right, then we come to the Quran section. Remember last time we were talking about who was shunned, misleading losers, and this funny story with splitting the ear by dedicating animals as sacrifice, and then Satan makes false promises. Now, if somebody wants to go along reading the real Quran, you're welcome to do so. And if anybody wants to comment, you're even more welcome to do so. Because remember, these are things that I read, and I just take what I believe is the percolated or whatever kind of gist of what I think is in there. So I could be very wrong. So 121 in chapter 4, and Lisa still, we're still in the women, says, as far as I'm concerned anyway, the people who follow Satan will go to hell. Okay, good. By the way, hell isn't really that well defined in Islam. It's just a terrible place, and heaven has a lot more description going for it than hell has. But it must be a terrible place. And 122 says the opposite. Those who don't, in other words, who don't follow Satan, will go to heaven. Great. And 123 says non-believers will not get help from this God, from this Allah. And 124 says, so if you are a Muslim and you do good, this equals to going to heaven. 125, be a Muslim, plus you follow Ibrahim, the goody two-shoe Ibrahim, then you are God's buddy. 126 says everything belongs to Allah and is under his control. 127 says ask about women, but for some reason you get information on orphans. I don't know why. But anyway, it says about the orphans, don't cheat them. And the funny thing is, there are differences in the various translations. So people are not 100% sure themselves what the Quran is trying to tell us here, because they make the women the mothers that you are actually trying to marry. And then it makes a little bit more sense, because if you get the explanation that what you should do is make sure that if you want to marry a woman, you are not marrying the woman to actually get to the inheritance of the son or the daughter or something. So you don't cheat them, and if you ask about a woman that you want to marry, be sincere about it. But there are differences in the translations depending on how people understand them. 128 says argue and be friends. So go and argue and later on make up again, enjoy the middle ground. 129 says you can't please all your wives, so just do your best, whatever you can. But
that's really an odd one, right? So you're allowed to have more than one, but it does say, as you quite rightly pointed out, and you will never be able to be equal, or ye shall never be able to be fair and just as between women, between wives, even if you strive to do so. So inherently, if you're going to follow this straightforward understanding, then the moment you have more than one, you are going to treat them unfairly, so it's like it's built in, right? So it's a case of like having a bug built into the system. Have more than one, but when you do, you will inherently treat them unfairly or unequally or unjustly, whichever translation you wish, which again is a moral failing. So it's almost like you are asked to do things for which there is a moral failing, so that you have to repent every single time. Because if you were asked to do things for which you could actually overcome once and for all, you wouldn't need to repent or return. So it's a self-justifying type of instruction.
And there is
yep. Just on 128 as well, it starts off by saying in Yusuf Ali, if a wife fears cruelty, which is interesting because verse 34 says that a man can verbally abuse, psychologically abuse, and physically abuse his wife. Yet here it says if a wife fears cruelty. Well, if Allah has ordained a man to beat his wife, that is cruelty. Then he says here, if a wife fears cruelty or desertion. So which one is it then? If Allah's ordained cruelty, then he later on says, well, if a wife fears cruelty, well, which one is the authorized account then on how to deal with your wife? There's a contradiction there. First, he ordains cruelty. Then he turns around and says, well, if she fears cruelty, then she can have a divorce.
And
But
I
that's
think
not.
there's another one in the beginning where I think it was it 4:3, which also says that if you're able to treat them justly, then go ahead. Well, so it's what you are saying, it's what Rob is saying, and in addition, it's dangling the carrot in front of you because it says, well, actually you can. Yeah, but here it says you can't. So there's also a contradiction there.
Which goes back to what we were discussing last week, where it says if anybody reads this book, they will find, and it wasn't from God, they'll find in much contradiction. It's interesting that the chapter that we're looking at, that challenges about if it doesn't come from God, then you find many contradiction. Well, within 20 verses on either side, so to speak, you're finding a contradiction.
I'm sure it can be explained. We just don't understand it correctly.
No, the book is easy to understand. It's a book made clear. So there is no
No, but only for scholars, right? Only for scholars.
And if you read it in the classical Arabic, yes, sorry, yeah. And if you don't Google it, and if you don't, if your heart isn't hardened towards it, yeah, sorry. I'm an ex-Muslim because I didn't take it into my heart, so that's why I don't understand this.
Of course. So you're just misguided, Andres.
And I got all my understanding from the wrong scholars for dollars and the wrong imams. And I get my Islam from Google, yes. I'm an Islamophobe as well.
Well, haven't you got a lot going for you then?
but we can see the problem here already. Within a few verses of this evening's discussion, we're already contradicting what has been said within the past few weeks within one chapter. So I have to ask the question, well, which one is it? If a wife fears cruelty, violence is cruelty. That's what cruelty is. Cruelty has always been in a sense of like some kind of intimidation. That could be a form of cruelty, which is what Nisa 34 talks about. Verbal abuse, then psychological abuse, then physical abuse. All of those are forms of cruelty. It says here, if a wife feels cruelty, well, Allah has already ordained cruelty then. Then he says, if you fear cruelty, well, which one is it? I can't make heads or tails out of this. Can somebody clarify?
Difficult.
But it's your fault.
Maybe there's a Muslim who will explain
can't
it to us.
understand it.
But there was somebody there. The young Ottoman was asking, can he ask the chat and panel my last question?
What was the last question?
I don't know. I didn't see it in the text there. So, Ottoman, if you want to ask the question, just type it in again. Okay, carry on.
All right,
so I'm following along in the. Go on.
The next sentence is, so if you can't please your wives, just do your best, and if not, well, tough luck. But if you split up, Allah will take care of both. Now that's a blatant lie, okay? Because I know a lot of people where the marriage was split up and left one of them devastated, or maybe sometimes even both. Or if one of them dies or something, if something happens to one of the partners, it's number one, rarely pleasant. There are cases where people feel relieved after a divorce, absolutely, but normally it's not. And a lot of times, one of them is really left in the dumps. So we'll take care of both. No.
Can I just add on that? But in Muslim communities as well, when a divorce does take place, very rare. It's almost unheard of. And I'm 52 years old. And I've grown up in the Muslim community. I have very rarely, if ever, heard where a divorced woman got remarried or was allowed to get remarried. It's always been the man that's gone on and got married. And if he's married a woman that isn't a Muslim, he's taken the children as well. So a divorced woman, if she's kuffar, she not only loses her husband and her income or any assets that the family had attained or accrued, she loses her children as well, which is why laws in this country have had to be changed in recognition of that. And if it's a Muslim from a Muslim community that has been divorced, very rarely have I ever seen a divorced Muslim woman get remarried.
This is an additional problem now. So the statement, the promise here that Allah will take care of you, no, sorry, that's not happening. 131. Everything belongs to Allah. Okay. And you need to be afraid of him. Her, it, I don't know. And if you don't believe, wow, everything belongs to Allah. Now, I don't understand the sentence, okay? Because it says that if everything belongs to one bloke, and then you need to be afraid of this bloke, and if you don't, well, it still belongs to him. So what is the point of this? And then it says Allah does not need worship, and there are differences here as well in the way that this is translated. But all we need to do is think: why are human beings created? For only one reason, and this goes for the jinn as well. So the jinn and the human beings are only created with one purpose, and that is to worship Allah. And here it says Allah does not need worship. So why create jinn and humans to worship if it doesn't need worship? Doesn't make sense.
Yep. Maybe somebody can explain that. Maybe they're his helpers. But again, if he's all powerful, he doesn't require helpers, and he can make anything happen at any point in time, in any way, place in the universe, right? So he doesn't actually require intermediaries as they're portrayed here.
And again, I put their differences because it means that the Quran is not clear. It's not explained. It's not fully, easy to understand and blah, 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 because the people, the scholars who've actually gone and, they've spent a lot of time investigating this, learning this, studying this, coming to grips with the language, going and looking at the Quran, and they still have differences in the understanding of the book. And this shows us that it's not a God who did this. This obviously 100% sure shows that this was written by human beings. And that's it. Then we have, again, I don't know why you need to, everything belongs to Allah. We just said this, 2 sentences ago. What the hell? Everything belongs to Allah. And then if Allah wants you to disappear, others will appear. What the hell is this?
What are we? Then, I'm following along in the thing. Is that 133 now?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's just a threat, right? If it says here, if it was his will, he would destroy you, O mankind, and create another race, for he hath the power. Well, yeah, apparently that's supposedly what he's claimed he has, yeah.
And okay, one thing I want to mention here, that this, if Allah wills. Now, there's a lot of sentences in the Quran which say, if Allah wills. This is what I call strutting. This is a God showing off, saying, well, if only I wanted, I could do this, but I'm not going to do it. This is like a bullshitter who says, well, I could just raise my hand and lightning will strike you, but I'm not going to do it. Because if you tell him, well, go ahead and do it, he will have to say, oops, no, sorry, I can't. And this is the same thing. If Allah wants, I can do that. Well, then bloody do it. See if this happens. Show us, get somebody to disappear and somebody else to appear in their place. Does this happen? No. So stop bullshitting. This is just showing off. And there's a lot of these sentences, if only Allah wills and wants and he could do all these things. There's a lot of stuff like this. 134. I didn't know what to do with it. If you want a good life, if you want to reward here, well, then go to Allah and you will get a good life. What's the point of this? So you can get a good life. You can get a good life in heaven. Go, but Allah is going to do it. So why doesn't he? Okay. 135. Those who believed. Past tense. I don't know why it's past tense. I have no idea what this means, what the significance is. If this is just to set up a rhyme, or if this is something to do with past people. I have no idea. And now this is one of the more sick sentences in the Quran. Stick with Allah even against your own family, against your parents, against your own brothers, against your own children, against everybody. Stick with Allah.
Okay, it's interesting stops though, because I don't know which translation you take, but Yusuf Ali says, stand firmly for justice as witness to Allah, even against yourselves. In other words, it's if I understand that, and I could be wrong, but if I'm understanding that sort of part of it, it's to be a moral person. So, if justice were to be the case, you wouldn't let somebody off because they were a family member or a kin or whatever. So I don't know if that's in contrast to what you're saying or whether it's just a different interpretation.
Okay, I took to mean that the justice is the one that Allah gives you. So
Oh,
you
ye
have
who
to
believe,
stick with the
stand
God.
out. Okay, and you who believed, be persistently standing firm in justice. O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even against yourselves. Okay, so whether it's witnesses to Allah or it's so is it because you think that it's because it's a witness to Allah rather than a witness to other human beings? 'Cause
Correct.
to my okay, so just to me, I was just
That's
taking
my
the part about
understanding.
justice. Okay,
Can I just add on that? But thus far, we don't even know what justice is. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole point of justice is law. So law has to be given objectively, and there has to be an act of obedience, willful obedience to it, in order for it to be perceived as being justice or just. Thus far, we've not received any law.
Yeah. But this is why I said, don't say, that's why I substituted the word justice with Allah itself. Because my interpretation is the justice of Allah, whatever that may be, and it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's from Allah. Because, well, we know Euthriphus' dilemma that whatever is good is what comes from Allah, not the other version. And
But
this is why I said stick.
unless Muhammad has ordained it, because we've already read several passages in the Quran thus far where it's Allah's putting Muhammad forward as a spokesman and lawgiver and as the equal partner. So, because as we go through the Quran and quite obviously through the Hadith, law or justice or what's right or wrong are very ad hoc. So this
Exactly,
will
yeah.
be as a preemptive to the ad hocness nature of Islamic revelation as it moves forward with what is new and what's going to be ordained, if that makes any sense. Hope it does, just to me.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point, yeah, because it is. Okay, 136, have faith in the messenger, the Quran, and the Bible. That's what I understand what 136 says. I'm sorry. I know it makes no sense, but this is what I understand.
I would add on that, Steve. You have to bear in mind the hadith that says that Allah sent 124,000 prophets and messengers. So Muhammad being one of them, that would be 123,999. So we have to include other holy books like the Vedas, the Upanishads. I've got a list of the holy books. Is it the Avestra, which is Zoroastrianism? Then you have obviously the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures. So when it says here, this the apostle and the scripture which he has sent previous, in my interpretation, then that would have to be all of those books, not just the Hebrew and the Greek scriptures.
But not Dianetics.
Sorry?
But not Dianetics. Scientology.
Well, no, because Scientology
is later.
Yeah, that's later, and also what else is later? The Guru Granth Sahib. I think that's the 16th century. Is it the Tripitaka? I think that might have been about the 7th century. I stand to be corrected on that. So whatever holy books were written beforehand, considering the hadith that talks about 123,999 prophets that arrived before Muhammad, that would have to include all the previous holy books, because it's not singling out what the books are. And there's 2 points. One, what the books are. So you'd have to go to the hadith, say, well, all of those then, because all of those were messengers. They must have had books. And then he's not saying in this, which would be the simplest thing for Muhammad to do or Allah to do, is, well, if the books were corrupted or not. And that is in itself a dilemma, because that would imply then that every holy book from the Hinduism, the Avestra, the Tripitaka, the Greek scriptures and the Hebrew scriptures will have to have been corrupted. All of them. Which is in itself. Yeah, so that needs to be, that has to be answered by a Muslim. A Muslim needs to come on the show and explain then why Allah at no point ever says anything about the corruption of any holy book. And there's something else on this subject as well. I forgot to mention last week. right? When you look at on the earth scene at the moment, how many Jews are there, or people who claim or profess Judaism
I don't
worldwide?
know, 18 million?
80 million. How many
18.
Hindus are?
It's
18
tiny.
million. Yeah,
It's
I thought
tiny,
it was
yeah.
about, yeah, I thought it was about 25 million. But even if we go 80 million, 25 million, what's 7 million? When you compare that on the world scene at the moment, there's what 1.1 billion Hindus.
Uh,
So why has Allah revealed the book to mankind, where He's predominantly of all the faiths targeting from the moment of Muhammad to today, targeted at best 25 million, yet 1.1 billion Hindus do not get a mention. Is that consistent with the book for all time?
yes, of course.
Or
I
presumably as
mean,
well, they could argue that it's just the chosen people and they're a smaller group
yeah, exactly. You
and
see?
everybody else has gone astray.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's a chosen, but the 123,999 prophets have already gone beforehand, so that would have to be some prophets that had something to do with Hinduism as we understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there might be some things, which is what they claim about the Bible, right? There's some things that are correct, the rest is wrong. They probably say the same, right? The other prophets came, but it's the people's fault, not the prophets. That's the sort of response typically that you'd get. I'm imagining.
Well, the default is they've been corrupted, and what they do is they go through the book and find something ambiguously that can somehow make it look like monotheism or it's a prophecy about Muhammad, which is interesting because all these other books seem to have prophecies about Muhammad. Most of them, like Hinduism, has so many prophecies about Muhammad that there are more prophecies in Hinduism about Muhammad than there are prophecies in the entirety of the Quran.
It does make
Well,
you
there's
think
a,
about Hinduism and Sikhism, right? As if they
Sikhism
were
is
before
16th
Islam, weren't they?
No, Sikhism
no,
wasn't.
Sikhs
Sikhism
not. It's 1,000
is a
years
Sikh.
afterwards.
is a 16th century belief, and because it's an amalgamation of many faiths around the time. And I personally believe that Sikhism was actually deliberately created because when you look at Hinduism,
Yeah.
Hinduism is a very passive, peaceful religion, and they're not belligerent in the slightest. So when the Muslims went over into India, the Hindus probably didn't know how to react because in their nature and their religion, they're not supposed to be violent. So it's almost like, in my opinion, Sikhism was created as a bulwark or a violent response in defense of Hinduism against the Islamic insurgents. That's my take on it historically.
Could be, yeah.
If any Sikhs listening out there that wants to correct me on that, because when you look at it, it has many creeds. One of them is to don the Qurban, which is they are, even by law in England, legally entitled to carry a knife or a sword as part of their religion in self-defense.
Yeah.
Why would they carry a sword, and who would they be carrying it against? It certainly wouldn't be against the Hindus, because it's not in Hindu nature to be violent, or even in Hindu religion to be violent. That can only be a byproduct of another religion. Make of it what you want.
Well, there's other possibilities. It doesn't
True.
necessarily have to be another religion.
There are other possibilities, but it's interesting that the one religion that you see that the whole world over seems to need to defend itself against is one religion.
Okay, that's another story. I agree. Yeah. Okay, I just know that a Sikh got into like horrible trouble in the US somewhere because he had this cultural traditional curved dagger on him, and the cops were really angry with him because they said it's a weapon, so they nearly shot the guy.
I always thought that Sikhism could have been like a response to Islam, but one that sort of was placating, right? With all the mentions of Islam in there, it's like a placating. Hey, we've also come up with our versions, but hey, we're giving reverence to you, but we've got our own one as well. So some of them came across that way to me.
Could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Well, then
always
we'll
thought
say-
it's a little bit late. I would have thought it should have come a lot earlier. Because the Muslim has already been and gone and all that. So, I don't know. Anyway, now we get a real weird one. 4137. Those who believed, again, in the past tense, then they didn't, then they did, then they didn't. I mean, what is this? Anyway, those who ended up not believing, And then this is a na, 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 na. You will not be forgiven and you will not get guidance. Come on, how childish is this? I mean, you were created by this creator who knows in advance what is going to happen to you, who, if you are flip-flopping, then the creator created you to flip-flop. And he knew in advance that you're going to end up not believing. And then he says, well, you're not going to get guidance, and I created you knowing that there is guidance, but then I will not give you the guidance because that's how I created you. This does not make sense. This is not rational.
Yeah, I'm just looking
138.
quickly. Go on then.
No, actually, read this in a translation. It's weird. It's weird. I mean, I did
Those
my
who
best to
believe,
make it easy.
it's like twice, right? You get 2 strikes and you're out. Those who believe then reject faith, then believe again and again reject faith, and go on increasing in disbelief. Allah will not forgive them, nor guide them. Wait, hang on. Nor guide them on their way. Okay, it sort of says it twice here. But if you look at the tafsirs, right, it basically just says with Ibn Abbas there that those who believe in Moses then disbelieve after Moses, and then again believe in Uzziah, after Uzziah in Christ, and then increase in disbelief, then stay firm in their disbelief in Muhammad and the Quran, as long as they remain unbelievers unto a religion righteous or guided way. Yeah, it's a bit weird. So it's obviously he's claiming it's referring to Moses and Jesus there. You get
Okay,
2
but it's
strikes,
convoluted. Whatever you make of it. I thought this was quite funny. And I think it's childish as well. Okay, 138. Well, tell the hypocrites they're in deep shit. Or do you want to have the politically correct version?
To the hypocrites give the glad tidings that there is for them but a grievous penalty.
Well, they're in
Yeah,
deep shit.
I think, as I think this is where it's important for Muslims and non-Muslims, and particularly our listening audience, that they have to avail themselves of the understanding of what in Islamic parlance does the word hypocrite mean. Who is the hypocrite, and what constitutes a hypocrite in Islamic parlance? And this goes back to a discussion that you and I had stopped probably about 4 or 5 years ago, where we were talking about Muslims that you have as friends that are what you perceive to be as good Muslims. And yet when we go to the Quran, from our point of view, they're hypocrites. They're not good Muslims because they are your friends. And this will be something that I'll put as a flag now, but it'll be something that will be repeated later on in the Quran as we go through the Quran, where Muhammad then sort of like he's mentioning the word now hypocrite, but then he kind of like, as we move forward and time progresses with Muhammad, he kind of narrows it down. What is a hypocrite in Islamic parlance? And a hypocrite, one of the criteria of a hypocrite is somebody who's a Muslim, but he takes the kuffar as friends.
Yeah, one of them, correct. Yeah. And Thunder, you're worse than my wife. I thought she's the only one who can tell me what I said 3 years ago.
No. With you, Stops. I remember many a conversation because we didn't always agree. If you may recall.
This I remember, yeah. But I think it's good. I think it's good to not always agree. Anyway.
How does anybody learn? How does anybody learn if you're always in agreement all the time? Learning comes about by 2 opposing opinions.
That's what I maintain. If you're always in the echo chamber, it doesn't help. Do you have, in 139, do you have a non-believer as friends as benefits? Okay, I didn't know how else to put this because they use the funny word honor. So does a non-believer honor you, or does it give you honor to have a non-believer as a friend? I don't know what that means.
I think
stick with Allah, it gives you more.
Yeah, it's basically, yeah, absolutely. So it's like if you're looking for glory and honor, you should be seeking it with your relationship with Allah, not seeking it with relationship with unbelievers.
Yeah, but what is glory and honor?
Vanity, if some kind of vanity, glory and honor in the right. There's good and glory and good honor, but then there's bad glory and bad honor when it's kind of like selfishness and vanity, when you're doing it for your own ego. So it's almost like Allah saying, well, if you're seeking to satisfy your own ego, then you should be seeking it with me, not with not with unbelievers. But the interesting thing is, I don't read it like that as much. I read this as like a thin wedge that is slowly being widening out, where Muhammad is separating those who follow him from those who are not following him.
Yeah.
And he's trying to create a chasm and a gulf between them, because he's fearing, or at some future point, the influence that the kuffar have on those who are following him. So it's almost like preempting that by creating a wedge that it will slowly widen as time moves forward.
Agreed. Okay, and then finally 140, that's it for today. Don't talk to those who mock the Quran, or, and this is very important, or you are like them. Hypocrites and non-believers will burn. Okay, the last part we know, but this is something I've heard a lot when talking to Muslims in these echo chamber groups, where they will, for 12 hours, talk amongst themselves about a specific word in the Quran and blah, 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 and they will go and mock other people, what this idiot is doing, because he's a Muslim and he's not really a Muslim, and somebody needs to talk to him to be a real Muslim. They say, if I go on there, they say, well, we're not going to talk to you. Or other people come on and say, don't talk to him because he mocks the Quran. And remember, in the Quran, it says, you are like him if you go and talk to them. And this is why people are warning others from talking to and with me of this one sentence. So this is, it's actually being taken seriously, and seriously today. This is quite strange. And I'm sure Rob has come across this as well.
But isn't that in contradiction with go out there and do dawah and so forth?
Yeah, of course. Of course it is. This is why I always retort them. Go look at what 16:125 says. Go and discuss with them in the best possible way. That's exactly what you should do. But here it says, no, don't do that. So which one do you follow?
Yeah, but this is one of those sort of like dividing verses. You can see what's taking place here. I reiterate what I just said a moment ago. If you go back to the 6th century and you're watching this unfold, you're watching a man like a cult's leader. When somebody's, when you have a family and one of that family members goes to a strange religious discussion, and then slowly they're taken in more by the charismatic leader. What does the charismatic leader do? The charismatic leader tries to say things like, well, your family are not going to like you coming here. They're not going to like what you're learning. They're not going to like the decisions that you're making. They're not going to like the fact that you spend more time here. And it kind of like when the person goes back to their family and the family start mentioning those things from that little person's point of view that goes to the meetings, it's kind of, wow, my leader was true. The very things he said would happen are happening. So there must be some truth in it, because everything he said is happening. And that's exactly what Muhammad's doing here, isn't he? It's kind of like he's already preempted what's going to be said, so that when it is said, it strengthens his position.
It's amazing. Okay, so that was the Quran section. Any comments on this?
The only thing I want to comment, I think we've covered everything, but there was one thing I didn't cover when you brought it out, and that was in verse 25, where it talks about Abraham. And it's interesting that every time that he talks about Abraham, it's kind of like only what he knows is read in the Bible. He doesn't mention anything that is unique or different or something that's not known. He refers to Abraham as a friend. Why would he mention that? Because that's the only thing, well, one of the very few things that I know about Abraham in Abraham's religion with the God of the Bible, like he was God's friend. In fact, I think from my reading of the Bible, and I've read it twice, Abraham is the only person described as God's friend. So it's interesting that he makes a point of mentioning that in this book here, because there's very much known about him, and that's one of those things that is known about him. So why does he pick up on that one point? It's because it's one of the very few things that Muhammad knows about Abraham. So he has to mention what he knows because he can't mention anything else unless he makes it up. And if he makes it up, he gets ridiculed.
And Tony makes a very nice comment, very, very appropriate too, that the people who wrote the Quran didn't have much knowledge. They were not educated or anything, but they were streetwise. And they were very clever at covering all the bases and making sure in a preemptive way that they knew in advance where the weaknesses were. And they were covering those, saying, well, if you see this weakness, it's actually your fault. And this I think they did, quite well.
And just to comment on Tony's comments as well, so he's making a comment. Islam is quite clever by covering all its base to prevent its followers from finding the truth. It really is a cult. It's so frustrating. Well, you're quite right on that. But the thing is with the cult, it only operates on the beguiled, the naive, and the foolish. It doesn't operate on people who may be familiar with how a cult operates, or two, that are familiar with somebody that's claiming to be an extension of something what a person already believes. For example, if you already have a belief in, say, Judaism or Christianity, you would recognize a false prophet from one thing: consistency. Now, Muhammad's audience, most of them would not have known what the previous scriptures were teaching, hence why they followed him. Whereas those who did, well, they were the problem. That's why he's trying to create the gulf.
Yeah, and the Quran does say that gives permission to kill those who are hypocrites and those who commit mischief in the land. So yeah, this is quite strong. This feeling against hypocrites. Okay, should we go to the theme of the month? Now,
Yes.
I'm a little bit scared of this, all right, because there's such a hype around this. There's so much, and I think what we need to do is we need to do the same thing what we did in the prophecies. We need to first go and see what is it that we're talking about. What is it that is being said? How can it be understood? Why is this contentious? And then look at examples, because, and this is what I wrote a script a couple of years ago. And it started off with, it may sound strange, but until very recently, some Muslim universities and scholars thought that slaves were things and laws were necessary for protecting the owner's rights. The slaves themselves had absolutely no rights of protection. So it was, and there are examples when somebody came and said to Morocco, to the king or whatever, governor, whatever it was of Morocco, listen, you need to do this, otherwise we're going to kill your subsidies and you won't get any money from us. He was like totally surprised. But why is that? Slavery has always been and will always be. They didn't even know it had been abolished. Mauritania, they criminalized it in 2007. These are things which, show me that the topic of slavery, and by the way, is it UNHCP, I think it is, estimate that there are still something like 43 million slaves in Islamic countries today in 2020. So this is absolutely astonishing, this topic of slavery. Now, the funny thing is, in the Quran in 3350, it says, Allah has given you, these people, as spoils of war. Okay, so this is something that the Quran tells people that the God is very much in favor of keeping slaves. He even gives slaves to people when they are fighting for him. And there are several translations. Even the Corpus says, indeed, we have made lawful to you, to your wives, whom you have given their bridal money, and whom you rightfully possess, from those whom Allah has given to you. And this is the Corpus. And then others say, Prophet, we have made lawful for thee thy wives, whom you have given their wages, and what? And this is now thy right hand owns spoils of war that God has given thee. Yusuf Ali says, we have made lawful to you your wives and paid the dowry and those whom thy right hand possesses. Okay, so there are multiple translations which all come down to this. So 33:55 then continues, it is no sin for them to converse freely with your fathers, their sons, their brothers' sons, or the sons of their sisters, or their own women or their slaves. Now, what we need to understand here is that the Quran uses two different terms here. Okay, so one is this malakat aymanukum, which is what the right hand possesses, and it uses abd, the word for slave or black person. So there are different ways that this is being used in the Quran. And the way that it is being handled, we've seen in multiple sentences already, that they are being taken as concubines. In other words, there are many sentences in the Quran which say you are allowed to have sex, or you're allowed to be married, which is the synonym for having sex, with up to 4 wives, even though the Quran says and 2 and 3 and 4, which would mean 9, but they have changed it into or, so it's usually taken as 4. So up to 4 wives and any number of concubines. And there it specifies in 424 that they can even be married. So this is the way that it works in Islam. This is what we see throughout the Quran. And now what people are doing is they're taking this malakat aymanukum, what the right hand possesses, and changing the label, changing the words. Because you also have mamalakat biyaminika, which means different women under you that you possess. And now what they are doing is they're changing this to people that you have employed, people who are under your oath, people that you are responsible to. But they don't realize what the Quran says, what happens to those people. Where you, as the man, you need to protect other people from seeing your genitals, except your wives and, well, those under your oath, they're allowed to see you naked. Does that make sense? Why would somebody under your care be subject to your whims and desires whenever you feel like having sex? And why would they be the ones who can also see your jewels or whatever? So it doesn't make sense. As soon as you apply what they are saying, as soon as you apply this under your oath, under your care, under your whatever, suddenly it doesn't make sense. So suddenly changing it to servitude or any other form of employment, in other words, changing the label, does not change the context.
I think, can I just interject there for a moment while
Sure.
it's on my mind? I think this is something that Muslims need to take heed of, as well as those wanting to learn more about Islam, those who want to have a discussion with Muslims. And the one thing that they're doing at the moment is when the newer translations of the Quran seem to be using synonyms that are less aggressive, less insulting, and less embarrassing. You use the term employment or employee there, whereas the older translations render the word slave. It's a bit like nowadays you get the word lightly beat, whereas in older translations, when it comes to dealing with a woman at the third point, it's chastise. So for those who actually want to avail themselves of a better understanding of Islam, the prudent thing to do would be to use older Qurans to get a better view of what the past 17 or 1400 years of Islamic teaching is, because the newer Muslims are more nuanced now, and they're playing on the ignorance of using translations that are better suited for a Western audience. That was the
But you
point.
mean not older Qurans, you mean older translations?
That the older the translation, the more accurate you're going to get as to what the thought and mindset of Islam is.
Exactly.
The newer translations are going to be more nuanced for a Western audience, because the newer wave of Muslims, for instance, the Hamza sources, the Adnan Rashids, and the other jokers, they're going to be smart enough to recognize, well, we can't use those older translations because that really brings shame on Islam. So we have to use the newer translations or create newer translations where we can use different words that are more palatable and less exposing to the message of Islam. So when you're using the term employee or slave, well, we know when the older the translation you use, the word's going to be rendered or translated slave. The newer ones are going to hide that fact and use the word employee. But anyone with any nuance and experience would know what the game is there. But the naive will not be aware of that, or someone new to the machinations of scholars or promoters of the polemics or the apologetics of Islam. They know what they're doing. And I think our audience that we have at the moment, and certainly the panel, are wise to that game. For anyone listening to the show that's listened to it later, that's new to the show or whatever, might not be necessarily that nuanced to that technique. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, somebody just tried that with me. He was referring me to a Quran and said, listen, I am telling you that you are wrong because here's the Quran and here's what it says. And I look at this, and this version is incredible. I mean, things like what you are saying in 434, it has changed to if a woman deceives you. It's not if you even suspect that she might get rebellious. No, no, no. If she deceives you, then you can first reason with her, then show that there can be consequences, and finally say that it could lead to the split up of your relationship.
There you go. There's an example and a case in point there.
And this for me is horrendous. That they are able to rewrite the book, to change the Quran completely, just to make it more palatable. And this is in my mind. This for me is hypocritical. Okay.
But for me, that just goes to show that what the Muslims are doing, they are changing the Quran then. Because you see, for me, changing the Quran or changing any book isn't about translation. Translation isn't changing the book. The message that you twist or contort or change or vary, that for me is a corruption. So the Muslims that are using newer, for instance, I'll give an example. We have had a Muslim on the show several times in recent months, Muhammad, where he says he does not trust any translation of the Quran, because I remember thinking clearly, asked him, well, what translation do you use, and he or recommend, and he says none. But what he does, he goes to a dictionary to get the Islamic translation of what the word means, or the Arabic translation of what the word means.
But then you're doing the same thing.
So basically what he's doing, he's got the Quran there, and every word, because he can't read it, he has to go to a dictionary to see what that word means.
Yeah, but then he's still dependent on those who are translating the word in the dictionary.
Yeah, but with the thing is, you say that, but the interesting thing is when you go to a dictionary, under the thesaurus or the synonyms, you can find words that are more suited, that are more palatable.
Of course.
So that's what he's doing, and that's what Muslims will do. So in that sense, you are changing the. See, for me, it's not the book that could be changed; it's the message. That's the argument that many have with Satan. This isn't polemics; it's just like an example. Yeah, there are hundreds of translations of the Bible, but every Bible you go to will say exactly the same thing. Like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then going through to the end, anyone who adds to these scrolls the plagues will be put on him. All the Bibles say that. You can use different words to say it, but the message is exactly the same.
Yeah, but the thing has been manipulated and changed. So even the Quran has. So it doesn't really matter. But the point is that what is being made here, thinking clearly too, exactly, the universe is made expansive, in other words, vast, and then it's expanding. But the problem is in the translations. And this is why this is important, because if you take the later ones, because when Hubble came out in 1929, then the Muslims changed it and said, well, the universe was made to be expanding, or is busy expanding it, and they added steadily, because this is what was the explanation at the time, up until 1998. And this
And,
is when we came out that it was not only expanding, but it was accelerating. So the translation that they provided in between, in other words, for something like 60 years, with the steadily expanding, turned out to be wrong because they made it according to the scientific understanding of the time. But then when the scientific understanding got updated, it turned out to be wrong. But they didn't change all the Qurans. So you will still get some translations of Qurans which still say made it stead or is steadily expanding it, which is a mistake in the Quran. And this goes to
and
show that if you are aligning yourself and updating the Quran according to the current scientific understanding, you may well be shooting yourself in the foot when this gets updated.
and it's not just the scientific understanding that they're updating the Quran with. It is the sense of morality that they're changing. It's not just the science, but it's
Okay,
also the
that's a
morality.
different, yeah, but I'm talking about this specific sentence. And now the same thing happens, and this is now the point that I was going to get to, because now suddenly you have the same thing in slavery. The same what Thunder was pointing out with beating the women. You're not supposed to beat the women anymore. People understand this, and this is why they try and stop this, and they're trying to make it look as though Islam totally prohibits this. And what they are doing, and the funny thing is, they are immediately diverting or deflecting to the hadith. Muhammad never hit anybody, which then, if you go and look, actually he did, but that's another story. But they're immediately trying to deflect this from the Quran because they know that the Quran does not prohibit the beating of women. And the funny thing is, neither does Muhammad. Muhammad also says, and those who beat their women, they will not be questioned at the end days. So there's a lot happening here. Anyway, but let's go back to slavery. Now, what I want to do, Jesus, there's so much material to go through.
I think one of the things that stops as well is to define what we mean by slavery.
Okay, this is exactly what I want to do now. So the first thing that we need to do, what somebody came up with in the comments just now, was look how the workers are being treated in Saudi Arabia. Now, that is not the slavery we're talking about. Okay, we need to be very clear here. Yes, I know, because we don't normally have slavery anymore today, we are suddenly starting to equivocate, and this is exactly the point that Rob was making, slavery with other things, where suddenly I'm slaving away, or my boss is treating me like a slave, and he's like a slave driver, and things like that. So in other words, we are now starting to use this in a much lesser or less strict way. So what we are talking about here, and I'm talking for everybody on the panel at the moment, is we're talking about the slavery where somebody is abducted, where people come to the village, burn it down, kill the men, kill everybody else, take a couple of women, rape them on the way, and then transport them sometimes over 1,000 kilometers back to a slave market where they are being sold as objects. So just like a carpenter is going to sell his, I don't know, his wooden shoes or his chair or something on the wooden chair market, people are selling slaves, they are selling human beings as objects, which can be inherited, which can be loaned against, which can be shared, which can be sold, which can be traded. They are objects. This is the slavery I'm talking about. Yes, I agree that the people who are working in Saudi, and I've seen this in the when Qatar got the football championship, they started rebuilding the whole city. The airport was already being rebuilt. So I went up, and this is on the northwest or western part of Doha. You can see where the people are. And I went and I chatted with them to see how they feel about this. Yes, a lot of people are saying they were being kept like slaves because what happens is when they come into the country, they are being flown in from outside. There are scouts who are bringing in people who are willing to work, and they are being promised the world. But when they arrive, the passports are being taken away. They're issued just a piece of paper, and these are work visas. And then they stay for a limited amount of time, and then they are being sent back so that they don't get used to living there. And they are being abused. They are being exploited like shit. And this is really, really bad. And there are a lot of organizations now who have been alerted to the fact, who are now going to the governments and saying, listen, we are not going to allow this anymore. And this is why Saudi and UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, they've been issued stiff fines for is it not? No, it's not malnutrition. It's mistreatment. There's some term that they were using of these people. But this is not the slavery that we're talking about. For example, for myself, I'm talking about really the abduction of people. And I gave this example. There's a village in Ireland called Baltimore that was attacked by Muslims. In Ireland, okay? Ireland, next to the UK. This was being attacked, burnt to the ground, women taken, raped, taken back and sold as slaves. This was in Ireland. And a couple of ships on the way were also attacked, and then the people taken as slaves, taken back and sold. And now Muslims are saying, well, but hang on, these were just people, they were pirates. They just happened to be Muslim. Well, yeah, that's exactly it. They were given the permission by their God that they would be able to take slaves because they are non-believers. So this is slavery in my, what do you want to call it, definition, is somebody who is being taken out of their village, out of their family, out of their group, out of their tribe, transported by force to another place to work under conditions where the only thing that you are getting is food, clothes, and shelter, because you are a financial investment. And we will come to sentences in the Quran where people are not being told to free the slaves because it's a humanitarian thing to do. No, this is it's a business transaction, because you're either supposed to pay a fine, so you can either free a slave or you can fast for 2 months, or you are supposed to free a slave as a punishment for something that you've done wrong. And thank you very much for this reference, because what Reanimator is doing here is pointing us on. Master Arab covered everything really. He did a fantastic job in pointing this out. So actually what we should be doing is showing some videos by the Master Arab, because he's using all the references, he's using all the text. Actually, you're right. I forgot about this. This is what we could be doing. Instead of going through all this work and doing everything that I've done, I could have just taken what Master Arab did. Because we actually started this, and then he progressed, and he didn't come back on the Gin and Tonic show because he was at that stage too busy with other things, and then he started coming back, and then he did his own thing, and then this was it. But it's true, he did a lot of stuff. So if you want to jump ahead, or if you want to know anything in addition, just go to the Master Arab. He's done a lot of material on this. Any other pointers that we should be addressing before we go to examples?
No, I think you've covered it quite well there. I think for me, it's just the owning of another human being as property, as an object that can be bought and sold, etc.
I think a good example to maybe consider the context of that. It isn't just working for an employer and getting a wage in a temporary sense. I think there are certain things taking place in the world at the moment, particularly sex slaves, where women or females are being taken captive, filled up with heroin, and taken away from their families, husbands, and boyfriends, and whatever, and tied to a bed and treated as sex slave prostitutes against their will, systematically raped in a sense. And I think that is a modern form of that we have today at the moment, that's slavery. So if you wanted to go by anything as to the identity of slavery in the Islamic parlance is concerned, well, look at that. That'll give you some idea.
Something else I want to point out, because the first thing that people will say is, well, how can you get slaves? Well, I just said it needs to be by force. And what Muslims today are saying, well, this is no longer applicable. Today, a slave can only be acquired by two means, either through inheritance or through voluntary enrollment. Because we don't have any more wars, because it's only during a war that you could acquire slaves, but we don't have those. So what they're saying, it's actually a voluntary thing, so that people, and this is what the Romans used to do. Okay, the Romans drove slavery so bad that if somebody was impoverished, where the state took too many taxes and uh, some people just went bankrupt, they could then go and instead of killing themselves, were able to work as a slave just to get food, shelter, and clothing. And they would just work without any rights, without anything. And this is what they would do day in and day out, just to survive. And this was being taken, and this is where, and okay, I must say, Islam did improve a couple of things, absolutely, and I acknowledge this. I will freely acknowledge that Islam gave slaves more rights, regulated it. Okay, so there are verses in the Quran, sentences in the Quran that say, okay, if this happens, then this. So it's always if one, then two. So if a slave has this, then you need to pay him this, or if they provide this, then you do this. So there are rules and regulations that were brought up and were fixed in writing, which did not exist previously. So this is one positive aspect of this, absolutely. But please don't come and claim that Islam came to free the slaves. That is not true. That is definitely not true. Islam never had the intention of freeing slaves. Never. It was being regulated, yes. It improved the situation through this regulation, yes. But there was no way that they wanted to free the slaves. And it wouldn't make sense. Because people say, yeah, but the idea of Muhammad was to free the slaves. Well, he said, if you have spoils of war, if you have women who were left over from a battle, then you could take them as concubines. Why? Why would you take the women as concubines if you were supposed to free them? Well, they say, well, if you let them free, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. They couldn't take care of themselves. Well, number one, that's bullshit. Because just because you leave a woman alone, suddenly she's going to perish just because she's left on her own without a man by her side. There's no man. She looks around. Oof, there's no man. Oh my God, I need to die. Boof, and she dies. That's bullshit. That's nonsense. No, a woman can survive without a man. And the second thing is, if you do enslave a woman and you rape her a couple of times, and then when you're tired of her, you free her again, you are doing exactly that. So don't come to me, Muhammad came to free the slaves, if at the same time you say, well, you can't free a slave because if a woman is free, then she doesn't know how to survive. Yeah, basic logical thinking. It doesn't work that way. So none of these things actually make sense. Oh boy. Okay. So the premise is, we know what we're talking about, which is slavery. The premise is we condemn slavery, and it doesn't matter whether it's the transatlantic slavery or it's the sub-Saharan slavery, any kind of ownership of another human being, we condemn categorically, no ifs or buts. Number 3, the Quran does allow for slavery. There are some people today that are trying to change the words, but it doesn't make sense if you see the contents in what they are being applied in. And we will show this in the different sentences. And number
Just a
4.
quick one. Oh, go on.
Yep. No?
I posted the link to the show and I said, where are all the Muslims to defend slavery in the Quran? And somebody in one of these Google chats came back and said, all these accusations have been smashed to pieces by Sayyid Molina Mududi. He has written a book on the topic. These accusations destroyed. Islam gave people the rights and encouraged to ban it. Over time, yes, it was banned. So there you go. That's from a Muslim who doesn't want to come on the show, but who, because I posted the link to the show, who doesn't want to come on and explain this. Right?
And this is exactly the point that we are making, that the Quran does not tell you to do this. People over time, and this goes back to my old sentence, most Muslims are better than their God. Yes, this is correct. Over time, Muslims did do that, but the Quran and the Sunnah does not. So it's not based in Islam. It's not based in the texts. It's people who are doing that. This is the same thing what I had earlier with my alcohol. The Islam and the Sunnah and Quran don't do that, but people do. So you need to differentiate. This is why I named the show very specifically Slavery and Islam, not slavery and what Muslims are doing today in the 21st century when they are being confronted with slavery. No. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're not saying that Muslims, every single Muslim is a slave trader. That is not what we are saying. But what we are saying is that there is no basis to believe that Islam, in the form, its current form, using the Quran and the Sunnah the way that we have them today, in any shape or form, go and abolish slavery. Never. Now, if I go to a sentence like in chapter 2, Al-Baqarah, the 177, and we've covered this in great detail at the time. And if anybody wants, you can go back and hear or see what we've done with the tafsirs, with everything, with all the interpretations of this sentence, which says, righteousness does not consist of turning your faces towards the east and the west, but righteous is he who gives money, though dear, to near relatives and orphans, the needy and the homeless and the beggars, and for the freeing of slaves. Okay, this is a sentence that you will get that Muslims will quote until the cows come home, because it says does not consist of faces east and west. This is not righteousness. But the righteous is who gives money for the freeing of slaves. This does not help you. And I've just explained it, and I don't know why Muslims seem to think that because it mentions freeing of slaves, this is something good. No, it does not, because it means that at some stage there were slaves. How did you get those slaves that you are now being told to free? So the thing is, what I'm expecting a modern Muslim to do is to condemn slavery outright, categorically. Any kind of ownership of another human being must be prohibited. And don't just tell me that the Quran says that you're supposed to free slaves. That does not help you, because it presupposes slaves. It presupposes that somebody went out and got slaves. In other words, the creator God of Islam created slaves, knowing in advance that these would be slaves. So what kind of a morality is that? If a creator goes and says, what am I going to create today? Well, let me create some slaves. They will be slaves, but then when they are old, they will be freed, because then I'm going to bring a book that says, well, you should free the slaves. But first, for the first, 150,000 years, I'm going to create people who are slaves. That is not a moral God. At least not as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd even go with the foreseeing of Allah, right? I don't think you always need that. I mean, that's like an even more powerful sort of fallback argument. But if there was something in there that outlawed slavery, we wouldn't be talking about this, and we would acknowledge and agree that there was a moral act there. So this idea of that you can let them go, but it's not, or you're encouraged to. But if it isn't outright banned, some people don't have to. If you're encouraged, but it's not outright banned, that means you can continue to do it. So if there was an outright banning, we wouldn't have the subject for this month.
And the thing is that we have pictures, we have descriptions, and we're going to get to that later on, how these slaves were being treated, how these slaves were being transported, how many of them died, how many were abandoned, how many were just left by the wayside, bleeding like crazy, sick as hell, dehydrated, hungry. They were just left there. And then men, to a great extent, were castrated because they were being used as workers to be left with the women, and they would not be true. You couldn't trust even a slave, so you had to castrate them. There are lots of hadiths where a guy said, well, he raped my wife. And then he was about to be stoned, and then somebody said, "Yeah, hang on, let me check." And then he came back and he says, "Well, he can't have raped your wife because he didn't have a penis. He was castrated completely." So these things happen. So it's such a sad thing, and I don't know why Muslims can't say, "Look, it's terrible, and it would be better if instead of saying for the freeing of slaves, prohibit slavery," just what Rob just said. Just put this in a couple of sentences. Repeat this 15 times. Don't own other human beings. Finish. Klar. That's it. No more. And we wouldn't be, interpreting it.
Listen to on the subject of black slavery by the religion of Islam, Sarah Foster. Sarah Foster, I don't know if she has a YouTube channel, but she's certainly been speaking to Jay Smith on the Jay Smith show. She goes quite deep into the historical context of Islamic slavery. She compares it to the slave trade or the Atlantic slave trade, and compares the two, but also digs in deeper as to how it affected. And you mentioned, for instance, that when the Muslims were taking black slaves, the males they castrated, and she compares that with, say, the cross-Atlantic slave trade, where they took them as families and kept them as families, which meant that this is by no way a condoning, but just a comparison, that the men were not castrated. They were allowed to have children and still allowed to have families as such. But with the Muslims, they weren't allowed to do that. So not only was the slave trade bad for taking slaves per se, it lasted longer, 7 times as long. The way they treated the men by cutting off their penises so they couldn't have children, the way they treated the women, they were sex slaves, and also how they tried to hide this through history. And what sort of for me is, as well as those points, is how historians dare not speak about this. This is a known fact. Yet every time the slave trade is spoken of in, say, universities and college, and when you have historical documentaries, it is always condemning the Atlantic slave trade. Nobody dares speak about the Muslim slave trade, yet it's the longest, the most obvious, the most brutal. It's had the most impact on the black community. And the thing is, the black community themselves are totally ignorant to this. They go on about repatriation and some form of, if you like, compensation. They want, what's the word? There's a word for paying back. They want their dues back. They want to be reciprocated financially for the slave trade that happened to their relatives and of the past. Yet they dare not themselves speak about, or they're just totally brutally ignorant to the Islamic slave trade. And yet the Muslims, and this is a subject that I want to touch as I've got 3 ideas for 3 shows coming up that I'll do in the future that I've got to write about. But this is one as well, where how the black community are being suckered up to by the Muslim community, as though to suggest that because the color of our skin is very similar, so, it has an impact in their cultural identity with each other, so as to go against the kuffar or the whitey, which takes place. Yet the irony is, no one can hate the black people more than the Muslims, and the black people are totally ignorant to that.
Yeah, they still cheer them on.
Yeah, they still they suck up to. I don't want to spoil the show that I'm writing coming up, but watch this space, everybody. That's going to be a good show.
Oh boy. Okay, another example, and we're going to get, because I just saw that in chapter 3, we're going to get to some of those other sentences, because I'm sorry, there is too much material to bring in just 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. There is so much stuff out there. And this is exactly what Thunder was doing, because normally people are not allowed to talk about this. People will not talk about this because it is such a contentious topic that a lot of Muslims will scream and holler to have this removed. So it could very well be that because we are quoting the Quran and we are quoting the Hadith and we are quoting what is being said in the Islam, in the way that it is being implemented and understood today, that they will just go and try and punish us for what we are talking about, what we are seeing. And this is the funny thing, that the speaker is being punished for the speech of, for quoting. And this is quite strange. But as you say, a lot of Muslims can't handle this. They cannot handle the topic of slavery, and which is why a lot of well-known authors shy away from this, because they are worried of the repercussions. So if you go to 221, for example, and this is quite, it shows you something about the value that non-believers have, the value that Muslims have, because remember, there's this false sense of supremacy within Muslims. There is this false sense that Muslims are something better than all the other people, that Islam is the better religion than all other religions, and that religion will dominate and will take over the world. So a lot of this is reflected here, because it says to marry a slave woman who believes is better than to marry an unbelieving woman, even though she is alluring to you. All right. It's better to marry a slave woman who is a Muslim. Can you believe it? A slave woman who is a Muslim. It's better to marry her than to marry a free woman who is not a believer, even though she is alluring to you. Now that tells you the value of an unbelieving woman as opposed to a slave woman who is a Muslim. Now, why okay. The funny thing is that Muslims are strongly discouraged from having Muslim slaves. So you're not allowed to enslave a Muslim. But the funny thing is, you are allowed to convert a non-believing slave to a believing slave, but this does not get them out of slavery. Now, the chances are better, because I think it was 80 or 85% even of the people that were abducted were women, because in the transatlantic slave trade, it was more the men who were supposed to work in the cotton fields. So there it was opposite. There was 85% men, and here it's 85% women who were supposed to work in the household and spread their legs when the owner decided he wanted to. And this is the way that it works. So, but you can marry, and this is another sentence, 4.3, marry women of your choice. We just spoke about that, 2 or 3 or 4, or a captive that your right hand possesses. And this is the way that it works. So in Islam, what you are told, you can have several wives, and if you can't afford one, or if you don't want one, you can just marry any one of your slaves, which then if you marry her, then she becomes a free woman. So this is an automatic so-called manumission. So marriage frees you, but converting to Islam does not, even though it would have been convenient, because then I think a lot of women would have converted to Islam just to get out of the slavery bond. Okay, if you go, what I have written here is that the distance between a poor Muslim and a slave was less than in a similar situation in the Americas. And it was acceptable to marry a slave woman, which was not the case in the Americas, because there, because of the color, the racism that was also built in there, they were not allowed to have this. So the woman was often given her freedom and was no more a slave, as though as more or less forced wife of a man. Her freedom was not necessarily very real. But the social position was better. And she kept her freedom if there was a divorce or if the guy died. So even though the transition from slave to wife was not that much different, because she was still, she had to, a woman in Islam has to be available for the man. Remember, we said this, we saw this last week when we read the Quran passages, you must obey, obey, obey. And in the misogyny month, we also saw that it was all about obedience. So a wife needs to obey the husband. and if not, he can beat her. Yeah. And then we saw in 424 that you are allowed to have sex with your slave girls, even though they are married, because prohibited for a male, for a Muslim, of women who are already married, except those whom your right hand possesses. And now what I want to do next week is go through this, the grammar, through the words right hand possesses, because there's dishonest people like Ahmed or Quranists in general. I mean, they really try to, they have to rewrite the Quran somehow, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And they run around and say, well, those words are not really what we say they are. So this is not really right hand possesses.
Because it's not a book made clear, and it's not a book easy to understand.
Well, I think we've always said that stops, isn't it? That people's morality has evolved past the book, and now they're trying to bring the book up to date with their morality, and so they have to play gymnastics with the translation.
Instead of being honest and saying, okay, the Bible had a Reformation where a lot of people said, yes, there's a lot of shit on the Bible, but we ignore this. We do not take these as commands. We take this as a description, as a story of what the people in the past did, which we know today is wrong. And this is the process that the Muslims haven't gone through. They have not been able to go and admit honestly that there are things in the Quran which are horrendous, that you need to accept that they are in there because this is the way that people lived 1,000 years ago, but we don't do this anymore. But the way that we have decided that owning another person is wrong, this means that it was just as wrong at the time. It's just that the people weren't aware of it. But if a God was around at the time, this God should have known it is wrong. And this is my accusation. If you believe that this book is the result of a God, that you have this divine authorship, then you are just as immoral as this God.
Absolutely. And that's the thing as well. It says a lot about the God as well, that this God who knows all things picked the man that he did to be his prophet. What does that say about the God that picked such a man to, if you're a God and you pick a reprehensible child rapist, a man who has slaves, a man who thinks he's going insane, a man that wants to commit suicide, these are things we'll be touching on later, but just look at the things that we've read thus far in slavery today, that you're a God and you pick such a man, a slave owner. What does that say about you as a God, that you would pick such a man?
And look, Americans are very much aware of the things that they've done wrong. A lot of Americans feel highly embarrassed about the situation of slavery, about the killing of the native Indians, the same way as Germans feel very much responsible and very sad about what happened 90 years ago when they were put in front of this cart which we said you need to hate the Jews. And a lot of people went with it because it was for their own personal benefit. And this is highly embarrassing for Germans today.
But the thing is, you're missing one glaring point in that, and this is a very clever technique that Muslims do. And sadly, many people are not savvy to this technique. And what they do is, for instance, I'm going to use an example. When critics of Islam or Muhammad bring out that Muhammad raped 9-year-old Aisha when he was 54, they will then bring out certain historical examples, like certain kings that married maybe a 12-year-old girl. And certainly in history, that is a historical fact. But there's two things there. One, many of the marriages that took place between, notice this, kings, okay, and important people of the time, those marriages took place for marriage alliances, so that the two countries then, he was never a child from his own country, it was always a child from a foreign country, therefore creating a united front in case they had to go to war with a third party. That was the motive for the marriage alliance. So you bring two states together against another state if you anticipated some problem or you were in a problem. Second of all, those kings did not represent any religion. They were not claiming to be prophets. They were not claiming to be God's representatives. Yet Muhammad was. And it's the same thing with these other things like slavery. You'll find the comparison is with, say, Thomas Jefferson. Thinking Clearly has brought out Thomas Jefferson. But the thing is, Thomas Jefferson wasn't claiming to be a prophet or a representative of a religion. Thomas Jefferson was just a politician. That's all. Muhammad's claiming to be a prophet. So the comparison makes no sense at all. It's faulty logic, and it's used or designed to play on the ignorance of the person that the Muslim's trying to reason with. So the audience and those who are listening to Muslims, you have to be savvy with the comparison, because every time a Muslim is trying to compare Muhammad with someone, they're trying to compare Muhammad's behavior with somebody that was not representing God, and therein lies the difference.
Yeah, and you need to ask yourself, is it really something that you want to propagate today? Or are you prepared to say, look, it was wrong. If it was wrong at the time, it is wrong today. And this is why Muhammad, who is the idol, cannot be a role model today. Because he propagated slavery. He traded in slaves.
But no Muslim is ever going to say that it's wrong. Because the moment they say it's wrong, that is the moment they're now leaving Islam. Because when you look at the backup that Muhammad gets from Allah and the Quran, to go against Muhammad by implication would be to go against Allah himself. To go back to my point earlier, this is the man that Allah chose. This is the man that Allah says when Allah and his messenger have decided upon a matter. So if Allah has chosen this man and you choose to challenge some of the decisions or actions of this prophet, you are then by implication challenging the authority of Allah. So therefore, at that moment in time, you are no longer Muslim. So a Muslim has no choice but to agree with what Muhammad did. So there are 1.5 billion human beings on this planet that are in agreement with slave trade, no matter what the cognitive dissonance is taking place.
Thunders, this is why you get the Quranists who think they've got it all made, because they are saying, well, we don't go for the Hadith. We only take the Quran, and in the Quran we've changed it to say there is no slavery. So what are you talking about? And this is the funny thing. It's dishonest because they can't. And this is the thing that I'm always trying to show here. Exactly what you are saying. You cannot whitewash this. The same thing what Rob is always saying. You cannot whitewash what this God is saying, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with this God. And this is what you always need to take into consideration when looking at this. And number 3, even if you go and you declare the hadiths as invalid and you're saying, okay, I don't care about that, you cannot get away from the way it is implemented. You cannot go and say, well, it says here that you can have sex with those who are still married. Well, no, this is not what it means. It means to support the women who are married, who are under your oath. Well, hang on, you are rewriting the Quran. You cannot do that. If you go, you can only go so far. You can only do so much with the words of the Quran. I mean, it is very vague and ambiguous, absolutely, but there is only so much that you can change it into. You can't make it say it was exactly and totally the opposite. You can't do that. And then if you go and you look at the way that is being explained in the Sunnah, there's no way that you can get out of it. So, Now, if you go to 425, then you will see if any of you have not the means whereas to wed free believing women, they may wed believing girls from those whom your right hands possess. That's what I was alluding to earlier. So to marry a slave girl is, a little bit down socially, but perfectly acceptable, not like in America. And this is now the difference. If you marry a slave girl, is this willing or not willing? Is this asking a slave girl to marry you? Or is this just so that you can say, look, I'm married, everything is okay with me, I'm not gay or anything, I married a slave girl? But the question is never asked in the Quran. But I mean, for a lot of girls, it is more likely that this would be willing because it meant an upgrade in the social status. But then in the second part of the sentences, their punishment is half of that for a free woman if they commit a crime of
What's the verse again,
indecency.
Stops?
425.
Okay.
So you have two parts there. One, which in my eyes are contradictory, because the one says, if you don't have the money, go and marry a slave girl. But the slave girl, if she is now indecent in any way, she gets half the punishment than a free woman does. And this is much softer than it was in Americas, because in America, if a black woman had sex with a white man, this was like a death penalty. So, yeah. Oh, here you have it. Yeah, it's quite a long one. Do you want to read the whole thing?
Yeah, we can do. So Yusuf Ali is a little bit shorter. If any of you have not the means wherewith to wed free believing women, they may wed believing girls from among those whom your right hand possesses. So it's those who your right hand possess. Just highlight that bit. And Allah hath full knowledge about your faith. Ye are one from another. Wed them with the leave of their owners. With the leave of their owners. Let's just highlight that bit. Keep that bit in there as well.
And this
And
exactly,
give them their dowries.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I just said with the leave of their owners. How do you reconcile this with, well, this is just another form of employment. You can't say that this is the owner. If this is just the women under your oath or under your care, if you want to marry them, you have to ask the permission of the owner. It doesn't work. So what I'm saying, this exactly is making my point. As
Look
soon
at-
as
look
you
at how
start
they've changed
implementing
it,
it
yeah.
doesn't.
Look at how they've changed it in Sai International. It was a much more a new version, right? So marry them with the permission of their people. That's not. Let's just have a quick look here. And whoever is unable to among you afford to marry free, chaste, believing women, then marry from what possesses your right hands of your slave girls. Okay, so there it's clear in the
Yeah, but hang on. Who do you have to
corpus,
ask?
right?
Go down a bit more. Who
Okay.
do you have to ask?
Okay, yep. Believing women then marry from what you possessed your right hands of your slave girls of the believers, and Allah knows best. So slave girls of the believers. So
There
slave
you
girls
go.
of the Muslims, right?
Yes. So it's not of your people.
No, that's what I'm saying. This part here is just not. That's an inaccurate translation, and probably willfully so.
It's
This is
misleading. Yeah.
far more accurate. Your owners, and in fact, your owners are Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And give them their dowries according to what is reasonable. They should be chaste, not lustful, and not taking paramours, whatever that may be.
Lovers.
Oh, okay. When they are taken in wedlock, if they fall into shame, their punishment is half of that of free women. Okay, so we'll put that in there as well. This permission is from among you who fear sin, but it is better for you that ye practice self-restraint, and Allah is oft forgiving, oft merciful. Okay, so what's this last sentence? This permission is for those among you who fear sin. So take a
Well,
slave
it's-
girl if you fear sin, and i.e. if you fear like lust from her, is that what it means? But it is better
means
that you
that-
practice
exactly.
self-restraint.
If you fear that you are going to have sex with an unmarried woman, rather go and marry a slave girl that you have a wife, and then you can have sex with more slave girls, but at least you are not living in sin, but you have got a wife, which is the justification for anything else that you do.
So for those in sin, is that sin for a Muslim, or is it a sin in case you lust after the slave? So rather than lust after her, marry her, and then you wouldn't have to lust because now she's your wife.
For me,
wonder if
this is addressing the Muslim.
Okay.
So the Randy Muslim can go and marry a slave girl, even if he doesn't have money, and then he can have sex with other slave girls, non-Muslim slave girls.
But if you have the patience and refrain from marrying maids, would be better from you, in that your children would be free. Okay, so he seems to suggest that it's. Oh, that's a long one. He seems to suggest.
He's marrying. No, look at the last sentence.
He gave you legal dispensation to marry your captives.
This is marrying maids is lawful for him among you he feared to commit sin, adultery, and debauchery.
Yeah, with who though? Interesting. Huh?
No.
I suppose it doesn't really matter.
This marrying maids. In other words, if you are marrying maids, for him among you who is afraid to commit sin, which is adultery and debauchery.
Okay, so these marrying maids here are not slaves then, these are...
Yes.
Right, gotcha. Okay, cool. Cool, okay.
So this is why 425A and 425B, in my eyes, says the opposite, because on the one hand, everything is okay if you go and marry them, but if they do want to go and have sex elsewhere, well, then the punishment is half. Why would the punishment be half? If you have married them, they are now free, they are your wives, and if they now go and do something, why are they punished with only half of that of a normal woman? I don't understand this. Why is there a distinction there?
Yeah, exactly. If they fall into shame, their punishment. So this is obviously if the slave falls into shame, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because they're still not seen as equal to a non-slave. So they're still a slave even if they're a wife.
Yeah.
I think it's if you're going to accept the root words and you're going to accept this as the direct word for word translation, then trying to dance around this is just your slave girls. There it even says it, right? But then they'll come along and say, well, that word doesn't mean that. It can mean 50 other different things, blah, blah, right? And at that point, you...
yeah, but it doesn't change the contents behind it.
No.
If you change the label, if you change the word, how does that change the fact that you can marry them and then and then there's a difference?
Well, presumably
in punishment. It doesn't make sense.
Well, presumably the argument would be from them is, well, if you change it so that it's an employee or that it's a servant, well, that's not so bad, right? Because, hey, we have servants today and that's not so bad. And even employees can almost be seen as servants in some cases. So now it's all okay. So all they want to do is change it to another word that we would find more acceptable. And then they could say, well, it wasn't really slavery. That's the
Rob,
idea.
They need to now change the word owner as well.
Yes, correct. So let's just see, what does Sahih International say here? So they say permission of their people, right? So they've changed it to permission of their people.
What you two are doing, you two are employing the greatest miracle Islam ever provided, the miracle of reinterpretation. This is so beautiful to listen to live.
But the question is here, you've got two interpretations, right, as you're pointing out there. And one says the permission of their people, the other says with the leave of their owners. So this sounds far more palatable. And most people wouldn't, what is permission of their people? Who's their people? Whereas there, with permission of their owners, it's very clear. Right? You don't own servants or employees.
Thinking clearly, have you read this? Islamic career counselor. Have you considered slavery?
I mean, there's so much more to go through over the weeks, isn't it? You've got the books and, we're just touching the surface here.
Exactly. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I have now collected 65 pages of material. And, we are still on page 1. So it's crazy how much you have, once you start digging, once you start looking into some of the historic texts, once you start looking at all the accounts of what is happening and all this thing, you have, I mean, people have never heard of Baltimore in Ireland. And it's only when you really start digging that you find these things. And then you have all these different church records along the coast. I mean, these Muslims went all the way to Iceland to go and find women, because they found that women with lighter skin were giving them higher prices than the normal black ones or the brown females that they got in their region. This is why they ventured all the way north. They went all around the Mediterranean. Eventually they went, and this is where the word slave comes from, they went into the Slavic countries to go and abduct people to bring them to work for them. Because this was all the way into the Ottoman Empire. This is not something that stopped in the 18th century or something. This only stopped 10 years ago. And people are saying it hasn't stopped yet. People are saying it's still going on. There are still countries where they are saying, what is wrong with slavery? We are doing these people a favor. We're giving them clothes and food. What more do you want? The people in Saudi who are working on some airport are given the same thing. But there you don't call them slaves. You are right, because they are not abducted. They are not taken by force. They can go and say, no, thank you. This is what a slave cannot do. A slave does not have the right to say no. And the worst thing is a female slave. Because even a woman, a free woman, a believing woman, doesn't have the right to say no if their Lord and Master says, I want to have sex. Like Muhammad even said, I saw a woman and I thought she's really beautiful, and I thought, ooh, I'd like to have sex with her. So I quickly went home and had sex with my wife, because the appetite I get from outside, but then I go and have sex with my wife. Now the wife doesn't know what happened to her. She doesn't know what happened to the husband. Like, the husband comes in, has sex with her. Why? Well, because he saw a beautiful woman outside, which made him randy. Come on, what is this? Okay, let's go for, we're still in chapter 4, sentence number 92. It is not for a believer to kill a believer unless by mistake. We've been this. We've been through this. He who hath killed a believer by mistake must set free a believing slave.
Remind me the verse, sorry.
492. So if you kill a slave by mistake, let's say you're driving a tractor and your neighbor has some slaves in your field and you kill one of them, then you need to kill one of your slaves who has done absolutely nothing wrong as compensation for the slave that he has lost. So you need to kill one of your slaves as compensation for the slave that you have killed of his. And he's done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And there's no way, I mean, and you said, yeah, but there is a way out of it. And well, yes, there is, unless they remit it as charity. Yes, so you can do that. But if he doesn't, there's no way out of it. So if he doesn't like you, he's going to make you kill a slave, because it means that you are losing your financial investment that you have made into that slave. And this is just,
and you're also taking a life that you might not have otherwise taken, right?
Exactly.
So you might have been a in inverted commas, a benevolent slave owner, in which case you wouldn't want to kill somebody. So
that's maybe why he even hates you. And then you are forced to kill a slave of yours just because by mistake, through an accident, you killed one of the other guy's slaves. So this is, come on, guys, please, just come and say it's sick. Just come and say we totally condemn it. Yes, it's in the Quran, but that was a different time, a different era. Yes, it is no longer applicable. No, I will not follow Muhammad who tells me to do these things. Yes, Muhammad was a great guy, but here he was wrong. Don't stick your hand in
that
this.
stops.
Okay, but it's the obvious thing to do. It's the right thing to do, isn't it? I mean, you would
Well,
do that. I would do that.
for those of us with a sense of morality that isn't governed by Allah, yes. But then, of course, stops. Where do we get our morality from? If we have they confuse subjective with the relative. But if you have a relative morality, how dare you question ours? As if that's somehow a response to all of this.
Yes.
But we've already come past 10 o'clock. Look how time flies when you're not
you're
having fun.
joking.
Huh?
Oh, shit. I didn't
Yeah.
even notice this.
Can I,
10
Okay,
o'clock
but
UK time.
can I ask a question before we go?
Yeah.
One of the questions that I've had trouble with in recent times, particularly since we've been touching on slavery, is when you look at Somalians, they're neither African nor Arab. It's almost like, is that the residue of the exploitation of Arabs, of black slaves via sex? Are they the offspring of that slave trade? Because they are kind of unique in their appearance, in as much they do not look like the typical general African people,
Correct.
in
Yeah.
their build, in their appearance, and in their hair. But then they're not Arabs either. So I've often thought over the years, are they? And I say this respectfully, the product of Arab rape of black women.
Genetically. Yeah. Very
Yes.
possible. Very possible. Yeah. Could be, because this is the first thing that happened. Because of the proximity, from
Yeah.
Yemen over to this Somali horn of Africa. I mean, it's just a couple of miles. I mean, a good guy can spit there or something. But very possible, yeah. It would make sense, yeah. But I've never heard of this before. I've never heard any.
Because if the rape was going on, they would have had to produce progeny, and the progeny you would see in Arabia intermingled with the indigenous or the indigenous Arab, but you don't see that. But what you do see in Yemen, Somalia is, and also the attitude towards the Somalians and the Yemenis from the Arabs as well. There is a kind of contempt there. A proactive contempt. So it's led me to believe that this unique appearance that they have in their build and in their hair and in kind of has led me to think that the only area I could see them coming from is the byproduct of the Islamic slave trade. I can't see any alternative. If somebody wants to put in the show notes or recommend me or correct me, I'm welcome to it. But thus far I can't find any other solution or conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, I get my morality from the gin and tonic. By the way, I've had to change my mind because I was listening to Matt Dillahunty and I thought I was a moral relativist, but I found out that I'm not, because there are things which are absolute for me. So I'm a bastard. I'm a mix. I'm not this. I'm neither near there nor there. I'm neither here nor there. I am a relativist, but I do agree that there are some absolute values. So I don't know what category that is.
Okay, well, I would suggest that you're probably a subjectivist, which is different from a relativist. So a relativist is somebody who believes that morals are relevant to the time. A subjectivist says that, hey, I'm selecting these morals based on certain subjective criteria. Those subjective criteria could, in fact, run throughout time, but a subjectivist wouldn't then argue that the criteria that they are selecting is objective. But what a subjectivist like Dillahunty will argue, because he's not a relativist, he's a subjectivist, but what he will argue is that once you've selected those criteria, so for example, the well-being of conscious creatures, then you can make objective statements with regards to the goal of the well-being of conscious creatures. Once you've made that subjective criteria or selection, then you can make objective statements. So that's his position.
Then I agree.
That's pretty
Then
similar
I agree.
to mine at the moment.
Okay, because I will say, look, it's absolutely wrong to torture babies for pleasure. So that's it. So there, I'm an absolute moralist, if you want to call it that,
But then,
as it were.
but then a Muslim might say to you, okay, well, where did you get that idea that, in virtue of what are you saying that it's
And
wrong?
this is exactly where I need to go back to this. What was it you call it, a subjectivist or whatever?
Yeah.
Because I'm saying this is based on the well-being of humanity of my peers. Yeah.
Now that is at this stage, at least, unless you could argue others, that's a subjective statement. However, that subjective statement could have been the same, on day one of human beings through to now. But a
Correct.
relativist would say, hey, in day one, this is what I believed, and I'm changing my morals based on X, Y, and Z
It's
now.
also possible on day
So
one.
that's the
Yes.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say
And
that
Berbers
most
are
people
more
are,
northwest. Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I just
I
can't.
think,
Okay.
but that's interesting. Yeah.
But it's something where I am consciously admitting that I can change my mind. Right? I didn't know because of information that I did not have at the time. I thought it was this, and then I got more information which made me change my mind. And this is something that I am free to do, which a Muslim can't do. Okay. Wow, this was quick now. I lost half an hour. I lost track of half an hour. What the book I'm reading, I mean, this is fascinating. Fuck, this is brilliant.
But I was just thinking as well, Stops, just before we finish here, that
Yeah.
there's no reason this only has to run for a month, right? If you've got so much stuff, why not? And it's such an applicable topic, and there's so much to share here. I think maybe it's a case of maybe running it for 2 months just because there is so much material that you've uncovered.
It's possible.
Anyway, we
Let's
can
see how
talk
we
about
go
that,
through.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because we're not. That's different. It's true. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, because it is shit. It's a lot. There's so much, and there will be times when I'll just have to ask you to take over because it makes me. I don't know. Maybe I'm a softie, but it really affects me physically. I really feel ill when I read these things.
Yeah, what I do is sort of distance myself and just look at the information to the best of my degree from a
Yes. But I can. It looks like I can only do this to a certain extent. Absolutely, I normally try and take it like in a movie. I will then say, okay, but look, these are the facts. This is this, and I will try and rationalize it. Absolutely, but there is some limit apparently, which surprises me actually, where I can't do this. Like I remember when we were talking with this Muslim about 424. I couldn't. I wanted to go and physically throw up because it was really, I had the butterflies in my stomach, the metal taste in your mouth, all these things. Absolutely amazing. Okay.
But what was you expecting from a Muslim but to agree with him? What are you expecting? The moment a person disagrees and goes along with what's right morally, they're not a Muslim anymore. That's the implication. You have to see it like that and respect like that.
Thunder, okay, I made friends in Abu Dhabi and in Doha, where you meet them, you get along with them. This is how it happens, and then you sit in the evening and you chat, and obviously because you are in an Islamic society, in an Islamic country, in an Islamic everything, you do tend to talk about things. They did not think like that. They were quite content with saying, I believe in having a God, going to heaven, doing all these things, but I do not believe the Quran literally. It was written for the people at the time. It was written with a certain kind of people in mind who required this kind of language, who required this kind of pacifying of the norms that they were holding. It doesn't apply today. So I do not take the Quran literally. I do not take slavery. I do not take it what it says in there. And this is their way of somehow bringing the two together. It's more so the literalists in the UK and outside of these countries, which are actually going and saying, I cannot do that. I have to go and live with the Quran. After all, it was written by God, and a God must know. And if a God tells me, then it's good. This is what this guy was saying. If the God says that you can do this, great. This is the basis for their morality, and this is what they are basing everything on. And the people in the Islamic countries are already one step further. And that's the way that I've experienced it.
Yep.
Okay.
So on that note,
Let's go for the hadith, which is it's a stupid one. Okay. Now remember, I told you in the beginning that book 71 is about what a nomad camel herder in the 7th century in the peninsula of Arabia understood to be medicine. They'd never heard about viruses, bacteria, but instead what he came up with, and this is in volume 7, book 71, and this is hadith number 636. And it's one sentence only. So, narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, the effect of evil eye is a fact. And he prohibited tattooing. So 2 pieces of information. The effect of an evil eye is a fact. This is what they believed. And this is what you need to believe because Muhammad believed it. So Muslims today must believe in the effect of the evil eye. And they're not allowed to tattoo themselves. So there you go. And on that bombshell...
Ad hoc note.
What?
I say on that ad hoc note of just outlining those.
Can I add one quick one just to get this out of the way? The Prophet forbade the wearing of a gold ring.
Oh yeah, Muslims don't like gold, do they? They used to come into the shop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the men are not allowed to wear gold rings. Ancient superstitions. Oh my God. Okay, what happened to the Streamlabs bot? Oh, we haven't been arrested. Okay. I actually wrote to them. I said, listen, it's true. Catch-22 used 4 of them. I said to them, please, can you be a little bit more lenient so that if somebody has 2 or 3 or 4 or something, that it doesn't complain immediately. So it looks like they've done this. If you have not had enough Islam for today, and now I've closed it. Rob, do you have the link handy? Otherwise, I just need to reopen.
Sorry, what is it you're looking for?
The Discord link.
Oh, 1 second for me.
No, I just opened it. Then it's fine. Then I've got it. I just had to reopen the document. Ching, 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 ching.
Well.
Paste and enter. Oh, I love this keyboard. I'm in love with my new keyboard, really. This is so nice. Brilliant. All right, guys. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. It's been horrible. It's been terrible. I hated it, but I love doing this. I don't know if we've helped anybody. I don't know if we've opened eyes. I don't know if we've made anybody doubt. I don't know if we've made anybody think, Jesus, what is it that I am believing? What is it that I am basing my life on? I don't know. But I just fucking hope so. See you next week. Good night. Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Thank you, people in the chat. Thank you for being here. Thank you for asking questions. Let's have a quick chat over on the Discord server. If there's any open questions, see you there. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.